Long before the name Philippines was ever spoken, before the islands were mapped and claimed, before languages diverged and flags were planted, there existed a people concealed within prophecy, a lineage sealed inside the ancient pages of scripture, not at the center of great empires, but at their edges, among the islands of the sea. The Bible tells us that from the sons of Noah the nations were divided. Names like Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and among them names the modern world has nearly forgotten: Gomer, Togarmah, Cush, names that seem obscure today, yet carried within them the bloodlines of tribes who would cross mountains, sail vast oceans, and settle in lands far removed from where the floodwaters had receded. Could one of those names belong to the ancestors of the Filipino people? Could a nation born of islands carry a forgotten inheritance from Genesis itself? What if your very DNA holds the echo of a biblical patriarch? A story that begins not in Southeast Asia, but at the deepest root of human history. This is not a political question. It is not a nationalist dream. It is a spiritual search, a decoding of the names God preserved in Scripture and the faces that bear their mark to this day. Because the Table of Nations was never merely a historical record. It was a map, a prophetic unfolding of peoples and purposes, a divine genealogy written with precision and intent. Today we step into that map and ask what the Bible may have always known. Who are the Filipinos, and why might their origin have remained hidden until now? The Table of Nations, how the world was divided, when the world stood silent after the flood, and the earth still held the memory of judgment. Noah's sons stepped into the ash of a new beginning. From 3 men the nations were born: Shem, Ham, Japheth. But Genesis does not stop at their names. It unfolds a sacred genealogy, a list often skimmed, often overlooked, yet filled with clues to the divine architecture of human civilization. Genesis 10 is not merely a record of ancestry. It is a spiritual blueprint, revealing how the nations spread, how languages fractured, how tribes rose and fell. And buried within its lines is a phrase easily missed: from these the coastland peoples spread in their lands. The descendants of Japheth scattered not into fertile valleys, but outward into the seas, into the edges, into the islands. The Hebrew word used for coastlands is ayim. It does not simply mean shore, it means the distant places, those beyond the horizon, the ones you reach only by following the wind and trusting the stars. These were not just geographical notations, they were prophetic placements. God had a purpose even for the lands no one else had yet seen. From Japheth came Gomer, from Gomer came Togarmah, a name shrouded in silence yet associated across ancient traditions with wandering peoples, coastal dwellers, perhaps even seafarers who moved eastward rather than west. Could this be where the story of the Philippines begins? Not in migration patterns alone, but in covenantal memory, in a name inscribed in Genesis before the islands even rose from the sea. Every island has a root. Every nation has a name that heaven remembers, even when the world forgets. Togarmah, the silent ancestor. Togarmah, a name most Bible readers pass without pause. Yet hidden within that single word is a forgotten lineage, a path not of kings or empires, but of quiet migrations, of wind-swept trails and ocean-borne destinies. Ancient sources place Togarmah's descendants near the northern mountains, Armenia, the Black Sea region. Others stretch the connection farther, linking him to Scythians, Sakas, and eastern nomads who gradually spread across Asia. But the Bible does not bind Togarmah to a fixed empire. Instead, his name lingers like a whisper, present, yet undefined, as if his descendants were never meant to rule the throne, but to inhabit the thresholds of the world. Some linguistic scholars trace the name to meanings like strong or bone breaker. Others notice something subtler, that in certain ancient dialects, Togarmah may carry a connotation of something stretched or drawn out. Could that symbolize a people pulled across lands and waters, extended far beyond their original homeland? When we examine the Austronesian migrations, that great wave of maritime travelers who populated the Philippines, Indonesia, Polynesia, and beyond, we see not conquest, but dispersion. Families in canoes guided by stars, carving their way through open Pacific waters. Something ancient, something ancestral, unfolding in silence, as if the journey itself had been ordained. If Togarmah was a father of distant peoples, then perhaps his legacy was not to build walls, but to cross waters, not to raise towers, but to reach coastlands. And if that is true, then the Filipino people may carry more than cultural heritage. They may carry a prophetic echo, a silence that speaks, because sometimes the quietest names in scripture hold the loudest destinies. The Austronesian puzzle and the prophetic journey of islands. The story of the Filipino people is often told through trade winds and maritime routes, through linguistics and seafaring vessels. But what if these were not merely historical accidents? What if they were fulfillment, a prophetic journey hidden within the geography of scripture? The Austronesian expansion, one of the greatest human migrations in recorded history, carried a people across thousands of islands, from Taiwan to the Philippines, from the Philippines to the far edge of the Pacific. But this movement was not only about survival, it was about dispersion, a divine scattering to the ends of the earth. Isaiah 42 declares, "Sing to the Lord a new song, his praise from the ends of the earth, you who go down to the sea and all that is in it, you islands and all who live in them." The islands are not forgotten by God. They are summoned, invited into praise, included in prophecy. In the Hebrew mind, the isles were not just nearby coastlands. They were mysterious territories beyond the reach of empires. The Philippines, with its 7,641 islands, fits that ancient vision perfectly. A place far from Babel's towers, far from the courts of kings, but not far from the voice of God. The Filipino identity, shaped through centuries of colonial names and foreign borders, may actually be rooted in a spiritual geography far older, one not defined by European explorers, but by the divine breath that scattered the nations. The movement of the Austronesians may have mirrored the ancient movement of Japheth's children, not westward into Rome, but eastward into mystery. The forgotten sons of Ham. Yet there is another layer to this story, one that darkens the waters, but deepens the truth. Not all migrations began in the north. Some were born in the south, from tribes associated with Ham, Noah's son, whose lineage was often misunderstood and twisted by later theology. Among the earliest known inhabitants of the Philippines were the Negritos, a people with deep ancestral ties to Africa and Southeast Asia, whose presence predates written history, whose story has often been erased. And yet their survival is a testimony. They represent a forgotten branch, one that biblical tradition ties to Ham, not as a curse, as false doctrines later claimed, but as part of God's intended diversity. A reminder that not all sacred lineages wear the same face. The Ata, the Mamanwa, the Atay, their very existence invites a deeper reflection. Could the Filipino people be a sacred convergence, a blending of Japheth and Ham, of north and south, of sea and soil, a people not divided by their roots but enriched by them? Scripture does not shy away from complexity, it weaves it together. Just as God formed humanity from both dust and breath, perhaps the Filipino identity is found not in a single bloodline, but in the sacred fusion of many, a people of prophecy, born of the islands, carried by wind, shaped by fire, hidden in the table of nations, yet written into the plan of redemption, not as outsiders, as living proof that God's purposes reach to the farthest shores. The prophecy of the isles hidden in the Hebrew scriptures, the word Aim describes the farthest coasts and most remote islands. It means more than geography. It points to mystery. It speaks of distance, not only in space but in spiritual waiting. The Aim are the lands that dwell in silence, lands that prophecy will one day awaken. Isaiah writes, "The coastlands wait for his law." Jeremiah declares, "Announce it in the coastlands far off." Ezekiel warns that judgment will reach the islands. Yet in every mention there is a haunting undertone. The isles are not forgotten, they are being prepared. The Philippines fits that prophetic rhythm, a land divided by ocean, a people scattered by history, yet a people who sing, who suffer, who believe, whose faith has outlasted occupation, colonization, and exile. Could this endurance be more than cultural resilience? Could it be the spiritual DNA of a people who once stood in the shadow of Genesis? The Hebrew prophets saw what empires could not, that the furthest places are often closest to the heart of God, that the islands are not margins. They are altars waiting to burn with praise. From exile to empire, how colonization obscured an ancestral identity. History remembers the names that conquered. It often forgets the names that were hidden. Before the Philippines was called Las Islas Filipinas, before it was labeled by foreign crowns, the people of the archipelago carried identities no colonizer could erase. When Spain arrived, it brought a new language, a new faith, a new order of names. But it also brought a great forgetting. Tribal names became province names. Local wisdom was reframed. Oral genealogies fell silent. And with that silence, the ancient ties to Genesis faded from the surface. The colonized were taught to look westward for meaning, to see Rome, Madrid, Washington as the sources of civilization. But what if the true origin lay east of empire? In the blood, in the bones, in the names whispered by ancestors long before any ship arrived. Scripture tells us that exile does not destroy purpose. Israel in Babylon, Joseph in Egypt, John on Patmos, each one forgotten by the world, yet remembered by God. So too the Filipino people. Even as their names were changed, their story remained, because a name given by man can never erase a destiny spoken by God. Spiritual signatures in the Filipino soul long before colonization carved borders, before foreign tongues renamed rivers and mountains, the Filipino soul had already been marked, not by empire, but by something ancient and sacred. There is a tenderness woven into Filipino culture that mirrors the hospitality of Abraham, a reverence for elders that echoes the commandment to honor father and mother, a deep longing for home, even among those who serve in distant lands, a longing that whispers of Israel's exile. This is not coincidence, it is resonance, a spiritual imprint that remains even when names are lost. The resilience of the Filipino people is not merely social, it is prophetic. Like Joseph in Egypt, like Daniel in Babylon, the Filipino soul knows how to sing in the strange land, how to weep and still believe, how to kneel without forgetting how to rise. In suffering, there is worship. In silence, there is prayer. Even the language carries remnants of the sacred, words rooted in compassion, honor, and sacrifice. The family is not just a structure, it is a sanctuary. Faith is not just tradition, it is breath. This is more than cultural inheritance. It is a reflection of divine design, a people carried by sea and scattered by history, yet still able to reflect the very heart of God through music, through memory, through mercy. Because the fingerprints of heaven do not fade, even buried beneath centuries. Even when touched by empire, they remain in the soul, in the story, in the sacred call that still echoes through the islands. A silence that is finally breaking. There is a kind of silence that only the islands know. Not the silence of absence, but of waiting, of carrying something sacred through long centuries of forgetting. The story of the Filipino people, when traced through scripture, is not merely one of ancient names or distant migrations. It is a story of divine memory, a people formed by wind and water, a people whose ancestry may stretch not only across oceans, but across covenants. If the bloodlines of Japheth and Ham converge in these islands, then perhaps the Philippines is more than a nation of scattered tribes. Perhaps it is a living testimony that God's purposes cannot be confined to borders or buried by history, that even the coastlands have a part in the unfolding redemption of the world. The genealogies of Genesis were not written to impress historians. They were written because God does not forget names, He does not lose track of tribes, and He does not overlook those who dwell at the margins of maps. Maybe that is why the Filipino soul carries both the tenderness of exile and the fire of praise. Maybe the suffering endured across centuries was never a sign of abandonment, but of preservation. Maybe the islands were always meant to echo back the voice that spoke in the beginning, calling every people, every tongue, every nation to remember where they came from and to awaken to who they are becoming. If this journey stirred something within you, if you find the fingerprints of Scripture in places you never thought to look, walk deeper with us. Like this video, if it opened your eyes to the Bible and your history in a new way, share it with someone who needs to remember their place in God's story. Subscribe so we can keep uncovering what has been hidden in plain sight. And tell us in the comments what spoke to your heart. Do you carry an ancestry that feels both ancient and unnamed? We would be honored to hear your voice, because the story of a people is never finished until it is spoken, and the silence of the Isles is finally breaking.